What happens when a calm, soft-spoken Hollywood star suddenly finds himself in the center of a fiery daytime television debate, facing one of the most outspoken hosts on television? The studio lights of The View glowed brightly that morning, reflecting off the polished glass table where conversations had sparked controversy for decades. The audience buzzed with anticipation, the kind of low electric murmur that always filled the room just before the cameras started rolling. But that morning felt different, because sitting quietly at the end of the table, dressed in a sleek black jacket and leaning slightly forward with thoughtful curiosity, was one of the most talked-about actors of his generation, Timothée Chalamet. Across from him sat a woman who had built her reputation on saying exactly what she thought, no matter who was sitting across the table. Joy Behar. The producers knew this segment might get interesting. But nobody, not the audience, not the hosts, not even the crew behind the cameras, could have predicted how intense the conversation was about to become. Before we step inside that moment, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, like the video, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, because the story you're about to witness is one that had viewers talking long after the cameras stopped rolling. The theme music faded. The cameras swept across the stage. Applause filled the studio. Joy leaned forward, her familiar grin flashing across the table as she welcomed the audience. "Welcome back to The View," she said, her voice carrying that unmistakable blend of humor and sharpness. Next to her, the other hosts smiled politely, but their attention was clearly drifting toward their guest. Because Timothée Chalamet wasn't just another actor doing a promotional interview. He was a cultural phenomenon, a generation's heartthrob, and someone who, until that moment, had mostly avoided heated television debates. Joy turned toward him with an amused look. "So, Timothy," she began, adjusting her glasses slightly, "you've been everywhere lately. Movies, fashion shows, red carpets. People call you the voice of a new generation." The audience chuckled softly. Timothy smiled politely, nodding. "Well, that's very kind of them," he said calmly. His voice was soft, measured, almost careful. But Joy wasn't finished. "And yet," she continued, raising one eyebrow, "you've also been talking about some pretty serious topics lately: politics, climate change, social issues. That's a lot for a young actor to take on." The tone wasn't aggressive. Not yet. But there was a challenge buried inside the words. The audience felt it instantly. Timothy leaned back slightly in his chair, thinking for a moment before answering. "Well," he said, "I think everyone has a responsibility to speak about the things that matter to them, especially if they have a platform." Joy tilted her head. "A platform is one thing," she replied, "but influence is another." A ripple moved through the audience. The conversation had just shifted. Timothy nodded thoughtfully. "That's true," he said. Joy smiled again, but this time the smile carried a hint of provocation. "Let me ask you something," she continued. "Do you think actors should really be lecturing people about politics?" The room went quiet. You could almost hear the cameras humming. Timothy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he folded his hands on the table. For a brief moment, the calm actor looked like he was carefully choosing his words. And that's when the tension truly began. "Well," he said slowly, "I don't think it's about lecturing anyone." Joy leaned forward. "Oh, I think it's about participating in the same conversations everyone else is having." A few audience members clapped. Joy noticed. Her smile faded slightly. "But here's the thing," she said, her voice sharpening just a little. "People don't elect actors. They elect leaders. So when celebrities start telling people how to think, some viewers feel like they're being talked down to." The room tightened. This wasn't a casual interview anymore. It was a debate. Timothy remained calm, but his eyes sharpened with focus. "I don't think sharing an opinion means telling people how to think," he replied. Joy tapped the table lightly. "But millions of young fans listen to you. That doesn't mean they can't think for themselves." The audience reacted with a mixture of applause and murmurs. The energy in the studio shifted again. One of the other hosts tried to lighten the moment. "Well, Timothy, you do have a pretty big following," she joked. The audience laughed. But Joy didn't laugh. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "You know," she said, "there's something interesting about Hollywood stars speaking out." Timothy watched her carefully. Joy continued. "Most of the country doesn't live in Hollywood. They don't walk red carpets. They're dealing with real life." The words hung in the air. Timothy's smile faded slightly. For the first time, the audience noticed a flicker of seriousness in his expression. "I understand that," he said quietly. Joy raised her eyebrows. Do you? A small gasp rippled through the crowd. The tension had officially crossed a line. Timothy leaned forward now, resting his elbows gently on the table. And when he spoke again, his voice was still calm, but stronger. Yes, he said. Joy waited. My family didn't come from fame, he continued. My parents worked normal jobs. I grew up in a regular apartment. The audience listened closely. And honestly, he added, I think the idea that actors can't care about real issues is kind of strange. Joy's lips curled slightly. Oh, they can care, she said. But sometimes it feels like Hollywood is living in a completely different reality. The audience murmured again. The tension was thick now. Timothy didn't raise his voice. But his response came quicker this time. I think everyone lives in their own reality, he said. Joy tilted her head. And what reality do you live in, Timothy? For a moment, the room froze. The question wasn't casual anymore. It was personal. Timothy paused. The studio lights reflected in his eyes. Then he said something that made the entire audience lean forward. I live in the same world everyone else does, he replied quietly. Joy let out a small laugh. Oh, really? The conversation was no longer just an interview. It had turned into a clash of perspectives. The hosts exchanged glances. Producers behind the cameras shifted nervously. And the audience could feel it. Something bigger was unfolding. Joy leaned in one more time, clearly ready to push the conversation further. But here's what a lot of people wonder, she said slowly. Timothy waited. Joy's voice dropped slightly. Why do celebrities always think they know what's best for everyone else? The studio fell silent. Timothy looked directly at her. And for the first time since the segment began, his answer carried a hint of challenge. I don't think we do, he said. Joy blinked. But I also don't think anyone else does either. A loud burst of applause erupted from the audience. Some people even stood up. The tension had officially exploded into the open. Joy raised both hands slightly, half amused, half surprised by the crowd's reaction. Well, she said with a smirk, looks like you've got the audience on your side. Timothy smiled politely, but his next words made the entire room lean forward again. I'm not trying to win anyone over, he said. Joy raised an eyebrow. Oh, I'm just trying to have the conversation. For a moment, even Joy seemed caught off guard. But she wasn't the type to back down. Not on live television. Not in front of millions of viewers. And as she leaned forward again, the spark in her eyes suggested the debate was about to get much more intense. Because what Timothy had just said was only the beginning. And the next question Joy Behar asked would change the entire tone of the interview. The applause slowly faded inside the studio of The View, but the tension in the air didn't. If anything, it thickened. Cameras quietly glided across the stage, capturing every expression, every subtle reaction, every raised eyebrow around the table. Producers behind the glass booth exchanged looks, sensing what every veteran of live television recognizes immediately. Something unpredictable was unfolding. At the center of it all sat Timothée Chalamet, still composed, still calm, hands folded lightly on the table, as if he were in a quiet conversation rather than a nationally broadcast debate. Across from him, Joy Behar leaned back in her chair for a moment, studying him. Joy had spent decades on television. She knew how to read a room. And right now, the room was leaning toward Timothy. That didn't mean she was about to back down. If anything, it meant she was about to push harder. She adjusted her glasses and gave a small laugh. Well, you're very diplomatic, she said. But let's be honest here. Timothy nodded slightly, waiting. Joy leaned forward again, her tone shifting into something sharper. You say you just want to have the conversation. But when celebrities speak out, it usually comes with a message. A direction. A point of view. The audience watched closely. And sometimes, Joy continued, that point of view sounds like it's coming from a very privileged place. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The word hung in the air. Privileged. Timothy didn't immediately respond. Instead, he looked down for a moment, almost as if reflecting on the weight of the word. Joy noticed the pause. So let me ask you something directly, she said. The room grew quieter. When you talk about social issues, do you really believe you understand the struggles of everyday Americans? A few people in the audience shifted in their seats. Even the other hosts looked slightly tense now. It was no longer a playful debate. This was personal territory. Timothy finally lifted his eyes. His expression wasn't defensive, but it wasn't casual anymore either. I don't think anyone can fully understand someone else's struggle, he said slowly. Joy nodded once. That's a fair answer. But, Timothy continued, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to understand each other. The audience responded with a small wave of applause. Joy tapped her fingers lightly on the table. You're very good with words, she said. Timothy smiled faintly. I'm an actor. A small laugh spread across the studio. For a brief moment, the tension eased. But Joy wasn't finished. She leaned closer, locking eyes with him again. You know what critics say about Hollywood activism? She asked. Timothy tilted his head. What do they say? Joy gave a half smile. They say it's performative. The word landed like a stone in still water. A ripple spread across the room. One of the other hosts quietly inhaled. Timothy didn't react immediately. Joy continued. They say celebrities talk about big issues on camera and then go back to their mansions and private jets. A few scattered claps came from somewhere in the audience. But there were also murmurs of disagreement. The divide in the room was starting to show. Timothy leaned forward slightly now. Not aggressively, but with a new seriousness. Can I ask you something, Joy? He said. Joy raised an eyebrow. Of course. Do you think caring about issues automatically becomes fake if someone is successful? The audience reacted instantly. Joy smiled. That depends. On what? On whether they're willing to listen, she replied. Timothy nodded slowly. That's fair. Joy studied him again. For a moment, the two simply looked at each other across the table. Two completely different personalities. Two completely different generations. And two completely different ways of seeing the world. Finally, Joy spoke again. You know, she said, there's a lot of people out there who feel like Hollywood talks at them instead of with them. Timothy absorbed the comment. I think that's a real concern, he said. Joy blinked. The answer wasn't what she expected. You do? Yes. The audience leaned forward again. I think any industry can become disconnected from the people it's trying to reach, Timothy explained. Politics, media, entertainment. It happens everywhere. Joy tilted her head. So you think Hollywood might be disconnected? Timothy shrugged slightly. Sometimes. The audience gasped softly. Joy couldn't hide her surprise. That's an interesting admission, she said. Timothy smiled. It's not really an admission. It's just reality. Joy laughed. Well, now you're starting to sound like one of us. The other hosts chuckled. But Joy wasn't done steering the conversation. She leaned forward again, her voice dropping just slightly. But here's the real question, she said. Timothy waited. Joy looked directly into his eyes. When you speak out, do you ever worry that you're alienating half your audience? The room went quiet again. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Timothy took a breath. Honestly, he said. Joy nodded. Yes. The honesty surprised the room. Joy looked intrigued. You do worry about that? Of course, Timothy replied. I'm human. A ripple of laughter passed through the audience. But, he continued, I also think silence can be a bigger problem. Joy crossed her arms slightly. How so? Timothy looked out toward the audience for a moment. Because if people with influence stay silent about things that matter to them, he said quietly, then what's the point of having a voice at all? Applause broke out again. Louder this time. Joy watched the crowd carefully. She had seen this dynamic before. A young guest, a passionate audience, and a debate that was slowly turning into a generational clash. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. You know what's interesting? She said. Timothy waited. A lot of young actors today talk about activism, Joy continued, but very few are willing to debate it live on television. She gestured around the table. Right here. The implication was clear. Timothy smiled. Well, here I am. The audience laughed and applauded again. Joy couldn't help but smile back. Fair enough. But the conversation was far from over. In fact, Joy seemed to be building toward something bigger. She leaned forward again. This time slower. More deliberate. Let's talk about something specific, she said. Timothy nodded. Joy paused just long enough to make the audience lean forward in their seats. Then she asked the question that producers backstage had secretly hoped and feared might come up. You've spoken about political issues before, Joy said. Timothy remained calm. Yes. Joy folded her hands on the table. So tell me honestly. Her voice sharpened slightly. Do you think Hollywood should be influencing politics? The audience gasped. The other hosts looked at each other. Even the camera operator zoomed slightly closer. Because now the conversation had reached the point where things could truly explode. Timothy looked at Joy carefully. Then he leaned forward. And when he answered, The room realized the debate was about to reach a completely different level. The moment the question landed, the atmosphere inside the studio of The View changed completely. It wasn't just another segment anymore. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Across the table, Timothée Chalamet sat still for a moment, the studio lights reflecting faintly in his eyes. The question from Joy Behar lingered in the air like a challenge. Do you think Hollywood should be influencing politics? The audience leaned forward. Some folded their arms. Others glanced nervously at the other hosts. This was the moment where things could either calm down or explode. Timothy inhaled slowly. Then he spoke. I don't think Hollywood should control politics, he said calmly. Joy tilted her head slightly. But I think everyone in a democracy influences politics. The answer immediately triggered a wave of murmurs from the audience. Joy tapped the table lightly with her fingers. That sounds nice, she said. But let's be honest. When celebrities talk, millions listen. Timothy nodded. That's true. And when millions listen, Joy continued, leaning forward, that becomes influence. The tension was rising again. The other hosts exchanged quiet glances. One of them shifted slightly in her seat, sensing the conversation was about to sharpen. Timothy didn't look intimidated, but this time his tone carried more conviction. Influence isn't the same as control, he said. Joy smirked slightly. Tell that to social media. A few laughs burst out in the audience. Timothy smiled. You're not wrong. Joy folded her arms again. But here's where people get frustrated, she said. They feel like actors lecture them about how to live, while living completely different lives. The words were sharper this time, more pointed. Timothy leaned forward, his hands resting lightly on the table. Can I say something honestly? He asked. Joy raised a hand. That's what we're here for. Timothy looked around the studio for a moment. At the audience. At the hosts. At the cameras broadcasting the conversation to millions of homes. Then he said quietly, I think people sometimes assume celebrities think they're better than everyone else. Joy nodded slowly. That assumption didn't come from nowhere. The audience murmured again. Timothy accepted the comment with a slight nod. You're right, he said. That answer caught Joy slightly off guard. You think so? Yes, Timothy said. Because sometimes people in the spotlight forget how their words sound to others. The room grew thoughtful. Even Joy paused for a second. But then she leaned forward again, determined not to lose the momentum. So why speak out at all? She asked. If it creates division, why do it? Timothy thought for a moment. Then his expression changed. It wasn't defensive anymore. It was reflective. Because silence can also be a statement, he said. The audience clapped lightly. Joy watched him carefully. You sound very certain about that. Timothy shrugged. I'm not certain about much, he said. But I believe people should care about the world they live in. Joy rested her chin on her hand. And you believe actors have a role in that? I believe everyone does. A ripple of applause moved through the audience again. Joy glanced briefly at the crowd before turning back to him. You know what critics would say to that? Timothy smiled slightly. They'd probably say a lot. Joy laughed. They'd say actors should stick to acting. The audience chuckled. Timothy nodded. I've heard that before. And what do you say to that? For the first time in the entire conversation, Timothy leaned forward with a slightly firmer posture. Actors are citizens too. The audience reacted immediately. A loud burst of applause echoed through the studio. Joy raised both hands in mock surrender. Okay, I see the crowd agrees with you. But her eyes still carried that spark of challenge. You know what I find fascinating, though, she said. Timothy waited. You're very calm. The audience laughed. Joy leaned closer. Most guests would be sweating by now. Timothy grinned. Maybe I'm just good at hiding it. That earned another round of laughter. But Joy's tone shifted again, suddenly more serious. You realize millions of people are watching this right now, she said. Timothy nodded. Yes, and half of them probably disagree with something you've said. That's okay. Joy raised an eyebrow. It is. Timothy nodded. Disagreement is part of conversation. The simplicity of the answer made the audience erupt into applause again. Joy leaned back, letting the reaction play out. For a brief moment, even she seemed impressed by how composed he remained. But then she crossed her arms again and delivered one more question. A question that would push the conversation to its most intense point yet. Let me ask you something personal, she said. The audience quieted. Timothy looked at her carefully. Sure. Joy's voice softened slightly, but the edge was still there. You're one of the most famous young actors in the world. Timothée didn't respond. You have money, influence, opportunities that most people will never have. The audience listened closely. Joy leaned forward. So tell me honestly. She paused just long enough to make the room tense again. Do you really believe you represent the voice of ordinary people? The question struck like lightning. Several people in the audience gasped. The other hosts looked stunned. It was the most direct challenge of the entire interview. For the first time since the conversation began, Timothée didn't answer immediately. He looked down for a moment. Then he slowly looked back up. And when he spoke, his response would completely shift the tone of the room and leave the entire studio reacting in a way nobody expected. The studio fell into a hush, so sudden it felt like the lights themselves were holding their breath. Timothée Chalamet met Joy Behar's piercing gaze without flinching. The audience leaned forward, sensing the gravity of the moment. Every camera angle, every microphone, every polished surface of the view's set seemed to amplify the tension. Finally, Timothée spoke, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made every word linger. I don't think I represent anyone but myself, he said quietly, letting the pause stretch long enough for the audience to absorb it. And yet, I hope that by speaking honestly, by sharing what I care about, I can encourage others to think critically, to speak up for themselves. That's all any of us can do. A ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. There was a palpable sense that he had just delivered a statement that cut deeper than any scripted answer ever could. Joy blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Then, in that characteristic mixture of amusement and sharpness, she leaned back, tapping the table lightly. Well, she said, exhaling slowly, that's unexpected. The audience laughed softly, but it was nervous, electric laughter, an acknowledgement of the moment's intensity. The other hosts exchanged glances, impressed by his composure, intrigued by the way he held the space without aggression, without deflecting. For a beat, the conversation paused. It hung in the air like smoke curling from a candle. And then Joy, with a mischievous glint, asked, So, you're saying influence isn't responsibility? Timothée shook his head gently. Influence comes with visibility. Responsibility comes from choice. I can't control how people use my words. I can only be honest with them. The audience erupted into applause. Some stood, cheering. A few even whistled. Cameras swung quickly to capture the reactions, close-ups of hands clapping, jaws dropping, faces alight with excitement. It was electric, the kind of raw, human reaction you don't see scripted anywhere. Joy leaned back, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. You're very self-aware for someone so young. I think everyone should try to be, Timothée replied, his tone gentle but firm. There was a pause as the audience absorbed it. The other hosts murmured in approval. Even the production crew behind the cameras seemed to let out quiet, astonished breaths. Then Joy leaned forward once more, softer now, as though shifting from adversary to interlocutor. You've surprised me, she admitted. Most young actors wouldn't answer like that on live television. Timothée shrugged slightly, smiling faintly. I didn't come here to surprise anyone. I came here to talk. The applause returned louder, sustained. The audience was on its feet now, clapping and cheering. Some were filming with their phones, capturing the moment they had just witnessed. A calm, intelligent young actor holding his own against a seasoned, formidable host. Joy shook her head with a chuckle. Well, congratulations. You've managed to turn a potential confrontation into a conversation. Not many could do that. Timothée nodded, the faintest hint of a smile crossing his face. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. The cameras panned over the audience, capturing faces full of excitement, admiration, and reflection. Whispers of approval and surprise traveled like waves through the crowd. Social media would erupt with clips within minutes, fans and critics alike dissecting every word, analyzing every nuance of the exchange. Headlines would appear by the hour. Timothée Chalamet holds his own against Joy Behar on The View. A young actor speaks honestly and sparks debate. Generational clash turns into moment of insight. And as the credits began to roll, the conversation didn't end with the show. Clips went viral, discussions erupted across platforms, and the energy carried far beyond the studio walls. People debated, disagreed, praised, criticized, but everyone was talking. Joy Behar, ever the formidable host, sat back, a subtle smirk on her face. She had challenged him. He had answered without faltering. And in that exchange, something extraordinary had happened. a rare balance between confrontation and understanding, intensity and calm, experience and youth. As the final applause died down, Timothy rose, thanked the hosts, and walked off the set, leaving behind a studio buzzing with conversation. The camera lingered on Joy, thoughtful, a small smile playing on her lips. The audience was still on their feet, some cheering, some whispering, all captivated. Social media would light up. Talk shows would dissect it. Fans would debate and defend. And the story of that day, the day Timothée Chalamet faced Joy Behar on national television, would linger in public memory, a moment of rare honesty and tension, captured for the world to witness. If you were watching, now's your turn. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Did Timothy handle the debate brilliantly, or should Joy have gotten the upper hand? And don't forget to subscribe to Stage View for more explosive, dramatic stories that put celebrities under the spotlight and reveal what really happens when fame meets confrontation. Because moments like these aren't just interviews. They're history unfolding in real time.